Yo, what is going on, everybody? It's Brave Cat here once again with another Frontier Signals update. So I've got a few things to run through here, but we'll just start out with the space weather, where things have been pretty quiet. So we have potentially a new incoming sunspot group here. You can see it over here on the magnetogram. Now it doesn't really look like much, but depending on what kind of feeds we're looking at, it looks to still have some potential. So on the far side sunspot imagery, this was those two regions that were over there, and they're pretty small. And when we look at some of these other things here as we see it on the oncoming limb, so it does look to be a pretty bright active region for what it's worth. And when we take a look at it on 304 angstroms as well, we can see there's quite a bit of kind of plasma activity going on in the corona. So it looks like the magnetic field lines as well kind of show that it's a pretty strong area magnetically. So we can see that here as well. We can, compared to these other pretty large sunspot groups, this one does still have some aspects to it. But it doesn't look like there's really much chance for flaring at all. We've got a couple of minor coronal holes kind of headed our way here. So things should be pretty stable. But that being said, when we look at this chart, the BZ has been kind of favoring the south, and the phi angle has been all over the place. So if we do get anything, it'll probably hit us with a little bit more than expected turbulence on the KP index. But overall, there really hasn't been much. So there's, a few other things got to point out here. At the end of the video, I'll go through some X posts, shout out Scan again, because, well, if you don't have a real survival plan, then I'm not sure what you're doing. It seems like the world is definitely kind of going into chaos, and we can all hope that it gets better. But, having a plan and moving forward regardless of what happens, that's always a potential. The option is always still there. So really quickly here, let's just go through the earthquakes really quick. All right, I've still been really bad about keeping my notifications turned off while I'm recording, but that won't be an issue. So looking at these slow slip events, again, it has been very consistent in the past couple of weeks here. And this is looking at the last 2 days, really, because, well, I don't think there's any data available for the 7th yet. So, there's been 570 more events on here, pretty much spread out all the way across the portion that this map actually does cover. So, North California, it pretty much cuts off there. You never see anything south of that. And likewise up here in Vancouver, we don't ever see the map cover anything north of that. So it's really just covering the main segment of the subduction zone here. So there's been movement all the way across the board. And also take a look at the last couple days on earthquakes, because I know I missed yesterday's upload. Apologies for that. But, there hasn't been anything huge going on. But we've still seen quite a bit of activity here south of the Philippines, where that 7 struck, and then we've just had a whole cluster going on there ever since. So it doesn't really look like that has slowed down a whole lot. And we've just seen kind of the regular 5s filling in these areas in the West Pacific. We've had ongoing, 30,000 foot high ash plume coming out of Kamchatka, as well as somewhat deep earthquake there. And then the US, this is becoming a interesting little paradigm here. So I'd say, especially over the last year or so, we've been seeing uncommon earthquakes basically become a lot more common. So when we look at areas kind of on the other side of the Rockies, especially going into Colorado, Wyoming, and then even some of these more eastern areas, and then, Texas, well, I'm still not exactly sure what is going on causing basically the seismic pressure, like really wants to release in these locations. So, we've had a 4 here and 3s going up the other side, and just all sorts of tremor activity in general. So we'll just have to see how that develops. I don't think there's any real danger going on the West Coast currently. Like I said, this is going to be a really drawn out kind of thing that we're going to see here. I think the tremor map is probably going to be like this for a while. And, you know, hopefully if anything big does happen, again, hopefully we have the warning signs available for that. But there's still been continued pretty deep activity going on in South America as well, you know, deeper than what is usually over here. And then going over into Europe. So, you know, last video I made, there was some sort of tremor swarm going on around Etna. And now there actually does seem to be a tremor swarm going on by Campi Flegrei. So, you know, I'm not exactly sure how potentially worrisome this is here. Most of them are like, you know, really, really tiny, so probably nothing to really be worried about. But, you know, this is the most kind of tremor activity I've seen around here in a while. So it's definitely something I'm going to be monitoring now. Again, all of these are like the smallest tremors you could possibly even record, and they're all really shallow. So I'm not exactly sure what that means, but we do have an increase in the activity there, and things have slowed down. Well, pretty much nothing is going on down here in Etna again, so really I think if we see sustained activity in any of these locations for, you know, more than a couple days, then it could be reason to start speculating about it. So as long as this doesn't become like a daily occurrence, you know, it really just means the pressure that's going on in the rest of Europe and coming in here from the east is just kind of spreading around and, again, finding these places of least resistance. So, you know, any sort of magma chamber, whether it's, you know, dead or alive, for lack of a better term, you know, that is still going to be a spot where seismic pressure wants to go, if it can. So, again, it's probably nothing to be worried about. And the volcanoes, like I said, Kamchatka is still going off a little bit above average. Well, it's just one of these, right? So there's several volcanoes in this area, and it's just been this one that has been doing anything. So, you know, luckily there hasn't been anything too crazy on here, but, you know, there's other kind of sources to look at as well. When you look at hotspots, when you look at other activity going on in volcanoes, you know, this resource doesn't really show all of that. So again, I want to try to find more data points for some of these areas because, you know, this isn't going to give us the whole picture. And then, you know, going into yesterday as well, pretty much the same exact things going on. Fuego went up a little bit here, but, you know, things are looking pretty much how they have been there. So I'll just kind of run through what I was going to at the end here. So yeah, like I said, I'm going to shout out Scan again because I feel like this is a really kind of, you know, a lot more advanced in terms of not just prepping, not just homesteading, but just all sorts of discussions and connecting with other like-minded people in general. So, I mean, really, like, there's so many different topics that can be talked about here. Just people looking for survival groups and whatnot. You know, I don't want to show too much here just because, you know, it is kind of, it's not a totally private forum, but, you know, it is $10 a month. But, you know, so far it's been really worth it for me and many others on here as well. So I would definitely recommend checking that out. But, you know, we're going to run through some of these various X posts here. So, you know, there's been a lot of various flooding ongoing in a lot of areas, as well as a few explosions. And then just kind of mentioning, I guess, what is happening on the global scene. So there was an explosion at a chemical plant over in China. Looks pretty gnarly there. Just going to go ahead and zoom in here. So yeah, I don't really know what the source of all these things going on is, or if there really is any sort of uptick happening, or if we're just getting better coverage on these things than we normally would. But either way, so there's some of the flooding in Pakistan. Seems like there's been very heavy rainfall in certain areas, mostly around Indonesia and the Middle East. It seems it's like a very large kind of area collapsed here where there was a bridge over in India. And looks like some people are actually stranded from that as well. There's been a massive fire going on in Malaysia. So that's over in Indonesia. Not sure what the details are on that, but that was from yesterday. So yeah, these are going to be a little bit out of order, but everything from the last couple days here. So here's some more flooding going on here. This was in Indonesia. Looks like that place has been just getting like biblical levels of natural disasters going on over there. Pretty crazy stuff here. Even Brazil, actually. So this is some flooding going on over there due to extreme rain once again. You know, there's definitely some kind of conspiratorial stuff you could speculate about, you know, whether it's like, you know, regular, well, not regular, but, you know, weather extremes happening because of the changes happening globally, or perhaps even, you know, man-made weather modification, which is definitely a thing. I mean, there's hundreds of US patents alone for things like cloud seeding technology and weather manipulation, so that is no longer conspiracy. You know, there's literally US patents on this stuff and all sorts of different chemicals they use. Now this is pretty crazy. There was a tanker explosion over in Panama, and that just looks absolutely freaky. I mean, imagine being in this I don't know if it's a tram or a bus, but then seeing that, I mean, that is like you are trapped in a space and you can't get out. That is just gnarly. Again, even more flooding this time all the way up in Russia. That looks absolutely horrendous. But again, we don't know exactly if, you know, we're just getting really good coverage on everything that happens, or if all of a sudden things really do seem to be just escalating on an unprecedented level. You know, I think there's kind of evidence there for both. And now we get into some of the more like, what the heck is going on kind of things with Iran. So apparently Trump made some sort of post here, you know, quoting, "A whole civilization will die tonight." And this was posted earlier this morning. And apparently there's like actually some sort of countdown clock or some sort of destruction if, you know, deals aren't made or whatever. So again, this is kind of runs along the lines of, you know, you could hope that things get better, but what if they don't? You know, what kind of community are you forming in order to survive anything that happens? You know, self-reliance, self-governance, self-everything. You know, just the fact that if anything major does happen, which appears to be likely the case, whatever it is, you know, is it just hoping things get better, or is there actually a possibility to, you know, weather the storm in, you know, a like-minded community coming together and forming a self-sustainable, you know, kind of alternate, you know, economy, basically, alternate systems of supply chains, you know, because it's getting to a point where we're just not going to be able to rely on the things that we currently have access to. And so I think it is always an option to form those communities. The sooner the better, really. And basically, if you can get to a point where you're self-sustainable and you can rely on people you trust and care for others in times where, you know, things could collapse, well, then all of a sudden you don't have to simply hope for things to get better. You can actually make things better by, you know, again, not having to rely on these fragile systems that are in place. So yeah, I think that pretty much does it. So I don't know what's going to happen, but I guess we'll find out here pretty soon regarding that stuff. But, you know, things aren't slowing down. So, you know, it's always a good idea to have secondary plans in place in case, well, shit hits the fan. So with that, I would definitely like to hear some feedback regarding this website, you know, what kinds of things other people would like to see on here. Because, you know, you go here and you can look at all this stuff yourself and do some of the kind of daily checks on what is going on. And, you know, there's plenty of things I have kind of planned, but, you know, getting other ideas is also really helpful. So anyways, with that, that'll wrap things up. So hope you all enjoyed, got something out of it. Please like and subscribe for more. Share this video if you dare. And as always, I will catch you all in the next.